Hello and welcome to the Comic Cave. I'm Ramsey, aka Captain Away, and today I'm looking at the classic 1988 graphic novel, Batman, The Killing Joke. Because it was specifically requested. Haha, yeah, I'm doing this. I guess I'm ready to lose some subscribers, alright. Yeah, just fair warning, this book has a fair amount of controversy over it, and I may just get a little ranty. But maybe not about what you would expect. I'll try not to go crazy with the ranting. And I guess I'll add a serious trigger warning here as well for anyone who'd like to back out now, cause yeah, there's some stuff that might trigger you. So anyway, a little background. The 1980s was all about making comic books darker, grittier, edgier, and more serious. This was largely fueled by the growing amount of British writers that didn't want to write silly stories about silly men in silly outfits having silly fights. They wanted comics to be more relatable to the real world, at least as they saw it. One of the biggest proponents of this movement was Alan Moore, who made his name bringing a darker, bleaker tone to the comic Swamp Thing. And along with other early comics from him, such as Watchmen and V for Vendetta, Moore's works were clearly critical to the point of outright contempt for mainstream superhero comics. Someone with that kind of open contempt for superhero comics might seem like a strange choice to bring in as a writer of superhero comics, but it's actually become a recurring thing in the industry. A way of sort of wiping the palette clean and starting fresh on new perspectives. In that vein, along with writers like Frank Miller and Neil Gaiman, Alan Moore helped revolutionize the comic industry of the 80s, and few comics stand out for that more than 1988's The Killing Joke. One note before we get going, for the 20th anniversary of the comic, artist Brian Boland was given the chance, thanks to, as he describes it, crazy computer alchemy that I'm assuming was primarily the wand tool in Adobe Photoshop, to recolor the comic more closely resembling his original vision. And it's that version I'll be using for this review, because there doesn't seem to be a digital version of the original comic. So let's see just what it is about this comic that has so captured audiences, and take this away. The comic opens on a rainy night in Gotham, which, is it ever not a rainy night in Gotham? I'm pretty sure the city is eternally locked into a rainy night. Batman shows up to Arkham Asylum, wanting to talk to the Joker. No real setup is given to this, or explanation as to why it's happening. We do see a cop and Commissioner Jim Gordon waiting for him when he arrives, so I don't know if this is just something we're supposed to think happens normally, allowing Batman to just show up to Arkham and question the inmates for no particular reason. But while the setup may be a little confusing, the lack of explanation is itself a powerful and noteworthy part of the story. At the time, it was still fairly unusual to have comics where you left dialogue off of a single panel, but here the story tells you everything they feel is important for you to know just through the art alone. Consider that this story had relatively limited space to get its ideas across, and in the 46 pages of the comic, aside from a sign on a receptionist's desk saying, "You don't have to be crazy to work here, but it helps," the creators decided to spend 2 entire pages completely textless. It's an admittedly pretty powerful opening to the comic. The first actual dialogue we get in the comic is in the final panel of the 3rd page, and all it says is, "There were these 2 guys in a lunatic asylum," which, granted, does describe what is happening on the panel, but also is still something we're given no actual context for until the very end of the comic. Keep that in mind. So Batman sits down and we get our first look at one of the major changes in the coloring of this version, with Boland having removed the yellow circle around the Bat logo on Batman's chest, which honestly I think is a weird choice. It looks really weird to me just floating on his chest like that. I know it's more in line with more modern interpretations of the character, but the Bat logo has also been redesigned to better fit the lack of background on those outfits. Batman proceeds to lay out the primary theme of this comic, that he and the Joker are locked into an endless battle that can only end when they kill each other. While he knows Joker is okay with that outcome, Batman doesn't want to be driven to that point. But his words are wasted because this isn't even the Joker he's talking to, it's someone disguised as the Joker so that the Joker could escape. And the Joker has done just that, and is already out in the world planning his next big move, starting with the purchase of a rundown carnival. Well, I say purchased, but, we actually see him shaking hands with the owner with some kind of hidden spike on his hand, and when he walks away, the owner has been Jokerized. To find Joker, Batman returns home to the Batcave to bring up his research, but mostly that just gives us a couple great classic references, like this classic style Joker, or this classic Bat Family picture that includes the original Batwoman, Ace the Bat Hound, and Batmite. Really? Batmite? Alright. Fittingly, as this comic is all about Joker, Batman, and Gordon, we next move on to Gordon and his home life, which is much less high-tech as he apparently has a scrapbook collection, which gives us yet another classic Batman reference, with this news clipping that is clearly Batman's very first appearance on the cover of Detective Comics number 27. Jim is being fussed over by his daughter, Barbara, who's made delicious hot cocoa. And how can you be in a bad mood when there's hot cocoa? But hey, who could that be at the door? Oh, it's the Joker. And he shoots Barbara right in the gut. Oh boy. This is such a loaded moment of this comic that I think I'm going to wait until the breakdown to really go into it. But what I'll say here is that we learn, primarily from Joker's dialogue, that Barbara's spine is damaged from the gunshot. Joker's goons then grab and carry away the commissioner while Joker proceeds to remove Barbara's clothing, and we seem to fade to black. We next see Barbara in the hospital where we get confirmation of her spinal injury, and that the Joker used that camera he'd had around his neck in order to take some pictures of her while she was naked. Yes, Bullock. Very sick. So Batman goes out to search for anyone who has any knowledge of Joker's whereabouts, but doesn't have much luck until Joker himself turns in tickets to the carnival at the police station. And all of this is portrayed to us in more pages empty of text. All along, Joker wanted a witness to what he has done to Commissioner Gordon, because his goal this time wasn't murder or destruction, it was to prove a point. And that point involved driving Gordon insane. So that includes what he did to Barbara, and also continues with Gordon waking up in the circus, surrounded by members of a circus freak show, who proceed to strip him naked and herd him like a calf through a converted carnival ride. The ride mostly consists of Joker singing a song that urges Gordon to embrace madness, while also showing him horrifying pictures of Barbara's brutalization that seem intended to imply sexual assault on top of everything else. Like I said, the 80s went really dark. Joker is unsure of whether or not his attempts to drive Jim insane are successful because the man is completely unresponsive by the time that Batman finally shows up. Here we get a callback to the opening dialogue of the comic with Batman's words about the endless repetition of their confrontation as they once again begin to fight. Joker runs away as Batman rescues Gordon, and Jim shows that not only has he not been driven insane, but now to prove a point to the Joker, he demands that Joker be brought in by the book, as above board and acceptable as possible to show the crazed clown that he hasn't won. As Batman hunts down his arch foe, we learn that everything that has happened was for Joker to prove that all that separates supposedly normal people from becoming just like him is a single, terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. To reflect this concept, the comic has been intercut this whole time by flashbacks to the Joker's past from before he became the Joker. These flashbacks are distinguished from the regular story now by being done in black and white, as opposed to what I recall the original having in more of a sort of sepia tone. The backstory for the Joker shows him as a regular Joe that quit his steady job to become a comedian, only to fail and find himself in dire straits while trying to support himself and his pregnant wife. So, in desperation, he agrees to help out these two mobster-looking dudes pull a heist at the Ace Chemical Factory, where he used to work. Just before the job is supposed to go down though, regular Joe's wife dies in a horrible accident. But the two mobsters don't care, and proceed to threaten him if he doesn't still help with the job. So he shows up as agreed, and they shove him into this Red Hood outfit. The implied idea being to make him a patsy/fall guy as the supposed ringleader of their group. But Ace Chemical changed up its security since he was last there, and the trio end up running across a security guard and getting into a gunfight that ends with the other two men being gunned down right in front of him. He then runs across the Batman. With this being long enough ago that the Dark Knight is still urban legend enough that Joe doesn't know what he's facing and is scared witless. To get away, he jumps into a vat of chemicals and emerges from the mix changed. And I will say that I do love this about the new coloring done by Boland. The black and white segments all feature just a small splash of color, Sin City style, but all those splashes of color are just dull shades of red, with the most brilliant red only appearing on the red hood itself. It's a fantastic way of giving extra emphasis on the hood and its importance to the tale. And this adds further emphasis to the Joker's change when he finally pulls off the hood at the end and reveals to us his fully colored Joker face. Nicely done. It might seem weird and even bad to ruin the mystique around the character by revealing his backstory in such a straightforward fashion, but I would argue that this was never intended to be an official backstory for the character. As the Joker says himself while talking to Batman, sometimes he remembers his past one way and sometimes another, and that he prefers that if he does have to have a past, that it be multiple choice. I think rather than being an official confirmation of Joker's actual past, these flashbacks are intended to show Joker's motivation. I like the concept that every so often, Joker remembers his backstory has happened in a different way, and that false memory leads him off into a new motivation for his next crime. On this particular occasion, he's remembering it as all coming down to a single bad day that drove him to insanity, and that led to him trying to prove that this could happen to anyone, even a beacon of justice, law, and order like Commissioner Gordon. But the Joker was wrong, twice in fact, because not only has he failed to drive Gordon insane, Batman is also the result of a really bad day, a day that drove him to put an end to the insanity that has the tendency to hurt so many. Or as Batman puts it, he's heard this joke before, and it wasn't funny the first time. And the Joker being wrong, I would further argue, suggests that this is actually not his real backstory. It's just a story that his crazed mind has made up to drive him in this particular moment. I'll also add that I think Christopher Nolan not only came to the same conclusion here, but also played with this idea to great effect in The Dark Knight with the way the Joker recounted different stories for how he got his face scars. The comic ends with another fight between Batman and Joker, ending in Batman refusing to use excessive force on the Joker and repeating his theme of wanting things to end peacefully between the two of them that he said to the phony Joker at the beginning. Joker disagrees that this is even possible, and finally gives us our context of the very first text in the comic. There were these two guys in an insane asylum. This proves to be the opening line of a joke that Joker tells Batman here, about these two guys trying to escape the asylum from the roof by jumping across a gap to another roof. One makes the jump, but the other is too afraid to jump, so the first guy offers to use his flashlight to make a bridge of light between the roofs so the second guy can just walk across. The second guy says, "What, do you think I'm crazy? You'll turn the light off when I'm halfway across." Yeah, it's not much of a joke, but it gets Batman and Joker cracking up hysterically as the panels pan away in reverse direction than they did at the opening of the comic. And that's literally where the comic ends. A lot of people say this ending is very ambiguous, but I disagree. Before running after the Joker, Batman tells Gordon that the cops are coming. As Joker tells his joke, we can clearly see a car approaching them. I feel like I remember that in the original coloring, there was also some red and blue lights on this car to indicate that this was a cop car, which I will argue is what it's supposed to be regardless, even if it seems the red and blue lights have been recolored yellow for some reason. I feel like the ending just signifies the primary theme of the comic, the idea of these two opposites locked into an eternal struggle between good and evil, and good continues to win and evil goes to jail. I've seen people argue that Batman kills Joker here, but I don't feel there's any evidence to support that, and if he did, I feel like it would completely ruin everything else that has happened earlier in the comic. All the evidence that sanity is more powerful than insanity. But you're always welcome to assign your own meaning to this ending. As for me, I'm going to head into the breakdown. There is so much I could talk about here. I could talk about the story, the plot, the art, the coloring, or whatever. But I think what I'm going to talk about is Barbara Gordon. You may have heard me mention the trope of the woman in the fridge in some other videos, which is the idea that women in comics are drastically more brutalized than male characters, and primarily only to further the story for male characters. I don't have numbers on this, but I certainly see lots of evidence of it as I go through all these comics. But I would argue, from a storytelling perspective, that the reason for it isn't just because those characters are women. While I don't doubt that is at least occasionally a factor, a large part of telling a powerful and personal story is focusing on how a person deals with the tragedies they bring into the lives of those around them, especially their loved ones. Not that I'm denying that some sexism may have been a factor here, though both Brian Boland and even Alan Moore have apparently expressed at least some regret over this scene, with Boland even saying that he wouldn't have done such terrible harm to poor Barbara in his afterword of the collected edition. Apparently when they were working on the comic, Moore asked then editor Lynn Wayne if it was okay to do this to Barbara, and Wayne said something along the lines of, "Sure, cripple the bitch." Which, like, wow. Cripple the bitch should never be the response from an editor to this kind of brutalization of an established character. It should be questions like, why cripple her? Is it important to the story? Does it help the story? Is there something else you could do with equal effect? Even if you decide it is worth doing, questions like that can still help you improve the story. And that's kind of the main thing here for me. This story was written by someone who honestly doesn't care. Or didn't care. I've seen people attack comics by women writers who don't normally write comics, saying things like, "This is what happens when people who don't have respect for comics come in and write them." Which is a sentiment I disagree with. I mean, if they didn't have respect for comics, why would they leave their normal medium to write comics? But also, I'm not seeing that criticism leveled here at Alan Moore, a guy openly critical about superhero comics, who has said that this comic doesn't relate to the real world in any way. So to him, Barbara wasn't a person, she was an unimportant character who could be disposed of because it didn't matter and we just needed to push through and tell this story. But someone being shot in the spine and losing the use of their legs does relate to the real world in a very real way. But what's really amazing is this leading to Barbara becoming Oracle, an empowering character that turned what once would have been seen as a disability into an entire new reason to live. Along the way, creating a brand new character type that has been often imitated but never matched. And that ability for later creators to turn what could have just been seen as a tragedy or a bad decision or even a hateful brutalization into an experience that one can learn and grow from and make the absolute most of is exactly what makes comics so damn great. And the reason why we're all probably here in the first place. 33 plus years after this comic came out, watching some random a-hole rant about comic books on a YouTube channel on some dark corner of the internet. Because we love this shit. And all that comes with it, good and bad. And that is, despite Moore's best efforts to insist that superhero comics have no meaning, also the overriding message of this comic. That we all continue to learn and grow no matter what darkness we face in our lives, and all we can do is stare that darkness in the eye and be the best person we can be so that the darkness doesn't win. And I did warn you that I'd get a little ranty. So I'm giving this series a recommendation level of very high. I mean, love or hate this comic, it's very easy to see how it became such a big deal. And personally, I think both the art and the writing show a lot of what is so fascinating about comics to so many people. The collected edition gets one delicious cup of cocoa. The comic itself is only 46 pages, so probably just about any price tag probably seems a little steep for such a small book. The latest deluxe edition does include a ton of bonus material though, featuring an intro by Tim Sale, an afterword by artist Brian Boland, an extra comic from Boland about a guy planning to kill Batman, and a ton of bonus sketch work and extra Batman and Joker themed art, also all from Boland. Thanks everybody for watching, if you actually did make it this far. Of course, you're always welcome to disagree with anything I said in the comments if you feel like you need to, but please remember to be respectful for others. I really don't want to have to mute the comments on any of my videos. I try not to get ranty most of the time, but as I said, this comic has a lot of controversy around it, so I feel like this was really the only way I could honestly approach this story. Hopefully next week I'll just be back to making silly videos. Either way, I hope you feel like sticking around, and I hope I can see you next time right here in the Comic Cave.